Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're navigating a really vital body of water in West Asia, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf.
Right. It sits there between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula.
And it connects out to the Indian Ocean, doesn't it? Through the Strait of Hormuz, Sea of Oman, ending up near the Arvan River Delta.
It's huge, too. I mean, third largest gulf in the world, apparently, after the Gulf of Mexico and Hudson Bay.
Yeah, something like, 237,000 square kilometers? About 900 kilometers long, 250 wide on average. Not incredibly deep, maybe 90 meters at its deepest.
And the surrounding countries, that's quite a list. Iran, Oman, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain.
With Iran holding that whole northern coastline, which is significant.
Absolutely. And its importance today, well, a lot of that comes down to the massive oil and gas reserves, underneath it and all around it. Huge strategic value.
Exactly. But we're actually going to dig into something else today, something that might seem simple. Its name.
Ah, yes, the name.
For ages, it's been known as the Persian Gulf, tied to the history of Persia, modern Iran. But then you hear Arabian Gulf, and that's where things get, contentious.
Right.
So our mission today is to really get into this naming thing. Why is it such a big deal? And what does the history actually, tell us? What's the real name?
Well, that's the interesting part, isn't it? Why the debate? Because, as we'll see, the historical evidence seems to point very strongly in one direction.
Okay.
The challenge to that name is much more recent. Understanding where that came from and the weight of history, that's key here.
And for this deep dive, we're mainly drawing on the Wikipedia page about the Persian Gulf. It gives a pretty solid overview, geography, history, and crucially for us, the naming history.
A good starting point.
All right, so let's unpack this historical name first. Persian Gulf. It sounds like it's been called that for, a very long time.
That's really the core point here. The sources stress that the historical name has always been tied to Persia, Iran. It translates consistently across languages. Persian Gulf, Bari Fars, Dari Pars.
So not just an English thing.
Not at all. And it's not just old history either. Persian Gulf is still the official name used by all the major international bodies. The International Hydrographic Organization, for example, they use it. They even see Iran Gulf as like an equivalent.
So it's the current international standard, not just a historical footnote.
Okay.
And the evidence for this going way back. You mentioned the ancient Greeks.
Yes, fascinatingly, the Greeks seem to be among the first to write it down, calling it the Persian Sea. Dari Pars.
Persian Sea.
Exactly. There's this voyage by Nearchus, right? Commissioned by Alexander the Great. His accounts became sort of the go-to geographical source for ages, and he used that name. So right from the early days of Western geography, the link to Persia was there.
And this wasn't just a one-off mention, I assume? It's stuck around through major empires?
Oh, definitely. During the Achaemenid Empire, that's 550 to 330 BCE, they controlled the whole Gulf, parts of Arabia too. Yeah. And records from that time widely use Persian Sea.
Makes sense, given their influence.
It does. Their name for the sea next door became the standard.
And wasn't there something specific from Darius the Great? An inscription?
Yes. That's a really strong piece of evidence. His Suez Canal inscriptions, 5th century BCE, he talks about the sea that begins from Persia, Parsa.
Wow, direct quote.
Pretty much. Directly linking the sea to Persia in an official royal inscription. It shows that clear association very early on.
What's also interesting is that apparently early Arab texts also made this connection.
That's right. The source points this out. Early Arab writers used terms like Kalish Fars and Bar Fars. That's Persian Gulf, Persian Sea.
So Persian Gulf in Arabic, essentially.
Yes. Someone like Ali ibn Hussein Masridi, a noted historian, used these terms, even including the Sea of Oman under that umbrella. So it wasn't just Greeks or Persians. The connection was recognized widely.
Okay, there must be places where all this evidence is gathered. The outline mentioned a book and a research center.
Correct. The book, Documents of the Persian Gulf's Name, The Ancient and Eternal Heritage by Muhammad Ajam, and the website for the Persian Gulf and Pars Sea Study Center. They're highlighted as key resources.
And they compile evidence from?
From all sorts of scholars, Western, Arab, Muslim, all acknowledging the name's long history. It really reinforces that historical consensus.
And this consensus held for a long time, even within the Arab world itself. The source says something about the 1960s being a turning point.
That's a crucial point. Until the 1960s, according to the source, all Arab countries used Al-Khali al-Farizi, the Persian Gulf, in their official documents.
So they called it the Persian Gulf too, officially.
Officially, yes, which makes the later shift quite noticeable. It seems linked to the rise of Arab nationalism around that time.
Okay, so we have texts, inscriptions, consistent usage across cultures. What about maps? Old maps must show this name, right?
Absolutely. The source stresses there's a wealth of old maps and atlases that consistently label it Persian Gulf. Again, that book by Adamim apparently has many examples. It's a continuous record on maps for centuries.
Can you give us some specific examples, like really old ones?
Sure. The source mentions a reconstruction of Anaximander's world map from the 6th century BCE.
Wow, 6th century BCE.
Yeah. And Hecates, another early Greek, 6th, 5th century BCE. Their maps place the Persian Sea right where it should be. Then there's Ptolemy, 2nd century CE, his famous atlas. Same deal. Uses the established name.
That's incredible consistency so early on. What about maps from later periods, closer to our time, but still pre-1960s?
The pattern continues. The source lists examples like Abraham Ortelius, a German mapmaker, around 1570, 1624. An Iranian map by Istakri from the 9th century uses Barfars.
Barfars, the Persian Sea again.
Exactly. Then you've got a British map from 1808, a European one from 1719, a French one from 1540, all showing Persian Gulf.
Even a Saudi map.
Remarkably, yes. A map of Saudi Arabia from 1952 is cited as using Persian Gulf. It really shows how universally accepted the name was until quite recently.
That range is pretty convincing. Across cultures, across centuries. There were a couple more examples too. London, an Iranian magazine.
Right. A map of the Persian Empire printed in London in 1747 labels it Persian Gulf. Interestingly, it also labels the Sea of Oman as the Persian Sea.
Huh. So extending the Persian connection.
Seems like it. And yeah, a page from an Iranian magazine, Mawla Nasruddin from 1908, shows Iran's map with Persian Gulf clearly marked in Persian script. All this visual evidence from so many different places and times, it just hammers home that Persian Gulf was the established name.
Okay, the historical case seems overwhelming. So then let's talk about the alternative, Arabian Gulf. Where did that come from, especially after all those centuries?
Well, the source pins the start of the challenge to the 1960s. It connects it directly to Arab nationalists, particularly influenced by the Pan-Arab movement under Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt.
So a specific political movement and time period.
Seems so. Yeah. It was a time of, heightened Arab political identity, a push for unity, and naming this major waterway became part of asserting that Arab identity, especially for the states on the southern coast.
And it wasn't just like a suggestion, it was more official.
According to the source, yes. Arab countries formally adopted Arabian Gulf, Al-Khalais al-Arabi, through a directive from the Arab League. It was a conscious political decision.
The source description is quite pointed, calling it a distortion, an offense to the historical name. That's strong language.
It is. It clearly frames it as an attempt to change history, essentially.
Yeah.
But it's also important, as the source notes, that this push hasn't changed the international standard.
Right. Internationally, it's still Persian Gulf.
Exactly. International organizations, most of the world, still use Persian Gulf officially. The source does concede that sometimes you hear the Gulf used informally.
Just the Gulf. Why is that?
Well, could be brevity, could be, as the source hints, sometimes related to Arab financial influence, perhaps in certain media or contexts, but officially, still Persian Gulf.
And remember that mention of a potential U.S. name change discussion in 2025. That got a strong reaction in Iran.
Yes, the source brings that up. When then President Trump apparently discussed it, the reaction in Iran was significant. It really shows how deeply tied the name is to Iranian national identity and history. Any suggestion of changing it is clearly a sensitive issue.
So when you put it all together, the history, the politics, what's the real significance here? Why does this name matter so much?
Well, the source connects Persian Gulf directly to Persian's long history and civilization in that region. Using the name is seen as reflecting historical fact, cultural heritage.
Acknowledging history.
Precisely. And trying to change it is viewed, therefore, as a political move to kind of rewrite or downplay that historical connection. It's about historical truth versus a more recent political narrative.
So it's way more than just picking a name off a map. It taps into deep issues of identity, history, cultural ownership.
Exactly. It touches on how we remember the past, who gets to name things, and how politics can try to shape our understanding of geography and history.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the main takeaway seems pretty clear. The historical evidence from ancient texts, centuries of maps, different languages, overwhelmingly points to Persian Gulf as the authentic long-standing name.
That sums it up well, based on the source material. The alternative, Arabian Gulf, really emerges much later, seemingly driven by specific political roles in the mid-20th century.
And the international consensus, the official documentation, still reflects that historical reality supporting Persian Gulf.
That's what the source indicates, yes. The official designation remains unchanged globally.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to consider. What does it really mean when these long-settled historical names suddenly become political battlegrounds? What does it tell us about how history and identity are understood or maybe manipulated today? Perhaps it's worth looking closer at the names on maps and asking, where do they come from and why? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.